Chicoine, thanks for coming. We've got an exciting time here. Dick Cole with Doolittle's Raiders. One of only 4 remaining for the record. And Wayne Johnson, the Flying Tigers. The way we're going to do this is so you don't get confused going back and forth, since each is its own story, we're going to talk with Dick first, and then the second half we'll talk with Wayne. So we don't have people wondering if the Flying Tigers flew over Tokyo. So Don Patton wanted me to be sure and tell you, as I do every year, to remind you that we have in the Twin Cities, the World War II History Roundtable. And if you go to the booth in the tent, you can get the schedule. Every month, you can hear amazing veterans tell stories far better than any history book you'll read. Live history, like you're going to have now. I can't promise it will be as good as these two gentlemen. This is a real priceless opportunity. So we'll start out with Dick. Dick, we were talking briefly. I want to make sure we focus on the action and the things that happened. And so I want you to, in your words, tell us a little bit about, rather than my telling it, I know the story well about Doolittle's Raiders, but I want us to quickly get to how you got into the mission. And one of the things I want to say that everybody may not know here is this gentleman was Doolittle's co-pilot. So he didn't just see Doolittle from a distance, he actually flew with him. And so he's got a lot more insight into a lot of things, even though I'm sure there were some things that Doolittle didn't tell you. So with that, Dick, why don't you tell us how you got into the mission? Well, first of all, tell us what the mission was, in your words, and then you can tell us how you got into the mission.
After the Japanese bombed Japan, President Roosevelt badgered the Army Air Corps to come up with some idea of how to pay back. And there happened to be a naval officer who was incidentally a submariner flying in an airplane over Norfolk Naval Air Station on a runway that had carrier markings on it. And a thought came to him that would it be possible for Army airplanes to take off a carrier? Anyway, he passed that information up to his boss, and it ended up with Admiral King, who was the chief of Navy operations. And from there it went to Roosevelt, and he said do it. So that's how we got into the operation.
So this was obviously a top secret mission. And again, I hope everybody here knows the B-25 bombers were modified in the Twin Cities. We've had sessions on that before at the World War II History Roundtable. But this was a top secret mission, so they didn't just ask you if you wanted to bomb Tokyo. How did you get into this? And when did you realize what you were doing?
The 17th Bomb Group that I was assigned to was stationed at Pendleton, Oregon. And we received orders to transfer to Columbia, South Carolina. After a few days that we landed at Columbia, they put out a message that they wanted volunteers for a dangerous mission. And on the way to Columbia, I had gotten an upgrade to first pilot in the B-25. And the gentleman that upgraded me came by and wanted to know if we could go together. So I told him sure. He was a good pilot and a good guy.
What was his name? I'm sorry, what was his name?
I'd rather not say it.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. Of course, that's acceptable.
Anyway, we volunteered and got into the training, and partway through the training he became ill and was bad enough that he couldn't qualify. So the crew and I talked it over, and I went to the ops officer and told him we still wanted to go. He said, well, the old man's coming in this afternoon. I'll crew you up with him. And the old man happened to be Doolittle. So we were crewed up with him, and that's how we got on the fast lane of the whole thing.
So when did you find out Tokyo was the mission? You knew it was a dangerous mission, and then you hooked up with Doolittle. When did you find out Tokyo was the target?
Well, first off, the mission was designed for a couple of things. One was we wanted to let the Japanese people know that their country wasn't free from an air attack. The other reason was to give the Allies and particularly the United States shot in the arm morale-wise. So after all our training and so forth, we went to California and got on the carrier. And 2 days at sea, we were told what our target was.
While you were at sea. And this was the Hornet?
There was a lot of jubilation at first. After a while, things got kind of quiet. People were wondering what they were doing there. But, nobody jumped ship and nobody backed out.
So you knew Doolittle well. Would that be fair to say? You knew Jimmy Doolittle fairly well. So before we get to the mission, can you tell us a little bit about him? Just about, not his history, but what he was like as a person, your relationship. You don't get that often.
Well, when Jimmy was assigned, or he took assignment of what the mission was, he had quite a lot of things to do. One of them was he had to make a plan, which he did. And first off, he needed an airplane that could go 2,000 miles and carry 4,000 pounds of bombs. So to help the situation, we took all the, first off, he wanted to go low level, which was between 200 and 300 feet, all the way. We had to take out a lot of equipment to make room for fuel. So they took out the lower turret and put a gas tank in there. They put a bladder tank in the bomb bay, and then they put another bladder tank up on the top of the bomb bay, which cut off the back of the airplane from the front. Actually, what we did, we doubled the fuel capacity of the B-25. We took out all the long-range radio equipment. We got rid of the northern bomb sight and just about everything that was loose in the airplane.
So was Doolittle a dead serious guy? Or did he have a sense of humor?
Yeah, he had a great sense of humor. He was a very friendly individual. He didn't dwell on, I guess you call pomposity. he called everybody their first name, and he was a team man. You could ask him any question about, make a suggestion, and he was receptive to it.
What did you call him? You called him by first name also?
Not hardly.
I didn't think so. I wanted to bring that out. Please tell me how you addressed him.
Well, he was very inspirational, and he was well educated. He had 3 degrees. One of them was the first aeronautical engineer degree, PhD, from
That's okay.
That's at MIT.
Oh, MIT, okay. I know he was a really smart guy. So he must have also had nerves of steel to be agreeing to lead this, just like you must have had nerves of steel to be volunteering for this. So what was your feeling when you ended up launching the mission prematurely? The story is the Japanese possibly encountered the carrier a little early, and so they had to launch prematurely, which was going to affect, of course, the fuel because they had to take off early. Tell me about your feelings when you launched early on this raid.
Well, when we started out, there was an agreement between the Navy and Doolittle that they would take us within 400 miles of the Japanese coast. And actually, we were supposed to launch at sundown on the 19th, but early on the 18th, we got picked up by a Japanese fishing boat, which had a long-range radio and was in contact with Tokyo.
Yeah, can I interrupt you for a second? I don't know this. Was there a question whether they would have contacted Japan, or did we later confirm we were sure they contacted Japan?
Well, the Enterprise, which was the other carrier on the ship, had what they called land radio.
Yes.
Radar.
Yes.
And they picked up the fishing boat.
Right.
And the upshot of that was that the fishing boat sent a message to Tokyo that they had seen 2 carriers.
Yes, that would get attention. So when you launched, when you were given the mission order to launch early, I want you to tell me what you were feeling then, because obviously it changes all the logistics with fuel and all.
Well, I don't think it was any different than had we waited until we were supposed to launch, because we were all set for it. The fishing boat did send a message back to Tokyo that they'd seen 2 carriers, but fortunately for us, the people in Tokyo decided to wait for confirmation. Well, that wasn't going to happen because the Navy sunk the fishing boat.
So tell us about the flight in and what it felt like when you first saw Tokyo, what level you were at, what altitude you were at, and when you started seeing anti-aircraft, and what it felt like as you flew over enemy territory for the first time.
After takeoff, the flight toward Tokyo, weather was broken clouds, a little rain and so forth, and it was about 4 hours. On the way in, we veered off course a couple of times to not fly over a couple of freighters. A Japanese 4-engine flying boat passed overhead, and there were no more instances of being detected. when we first saw Japan, I don't know about the other crew members, but I was impressed by the beauty of the country. Everything was nice and green and in an orderly manner. And we weren't picked up by anybody.
And what altitude were you at when you were looking down?
We shored into Japan at a low altitude, and our target was northwest Tokyo, because we had incendiary bombs, and according to the original plan, we were to take off at dusk and bomb Tokyo, light it up with the incendiary bomb for a couple of reasons. One, to do as much damage as we could. The other was to give the airplanes that had Nagoya and Kobe farther down the island chain a point of reference, because by the time they got there, it would be good and dark.
So when you say northwest Tokyo was your target, how many planes were going? All 16 or just?
We were flying in trail because we couldn't afford to fly formation. Okay.
So you're in a single line, not in formation, flying in?
Because of the fuel usage.
Yes. And since you were flying with Doolittle as the co-pilot, you were the lead plane?
Yes.
So you had an amazing view?
Yeah.
And at what altitude? Are you 300 feet or 1,000 feet?
No, we flew to our, what we thought was northwest Tokyo, and he pulled up to 1,500 feet. Fred Bremer, the bombardier, dropped the bomb. We went back down on the low altitude and headed out toward the China Sea. And while we were on the bombing run, we had some ACAC, but there wasn't accurate.
So you're dropping bombs from 1,500 feet. So you must have felt the repercussions from the blast.
No, just the opposite. The incendiary bomb was were like little bomblets in a crate. We call it a banana crate. But shortly after you drop them, that separates. And they go all over everywhere. So there's no reason.
So little flashes.
We didn't get a chance to see what they did, but the main reason we didn't want to hang around anyway.
Right. I'm sure that's right. I'm sure that's right. So then, of course, I've read your story. So then you flew into China, and you were able to be recovered. You and Doolittle and some of that party recovered fairly quickly, but you still had to survive the landing of your plane before the Chinese resistance recovered you. Tell us about landing the plane and surviving that. That's you don't take that for granted, I assume.
Well, according to the original plan, there was supposed to be a homing station, the radio homing station, that we could get on our radio compass. The airplane carrying that mechanism crashed on the way there, and so we ended up with no homing. The other thing, the storm that was over China at that time had everything socked in down to the ground, and we couldn't have found an airfield or made any kind of approach to land because we had no idea what the terrain was like. So that left us the alternative of flying until we ran out of fuel and bailing out, which we did. We all survived the bailout, and nobody was injured. And since it was at night, I was very lucky. My chute drifted over a pine tree, and I didn't hit the ground. I stayed in the tree. And I know I didn't sleep, but I dozed. The next morning, the storm had abated, and you could see the ground.
So you pulled out a knife and cut your lines? You caught in a pine tree, you were able to cut your lines and just go down?
No, I climbed down.
Right. For those of you who have never talked to anybody that jumped at night, this is not my first-hand experience, a friend of mine, but it's nice to be able to see the ground so you can roll, but at night you can't see the ground. So oftentimes, no matter how experienced you are, you break your leg or legs or take a pretty hard hit, so it's nice to be hung up in a tree. Right?
Anyway, it worked out okay for me, and we started walking west. And by that evening, we were all together. And we were in occupied territory. We got picked up by, we called them guerrillas. And we didn't realize it, but at that time, every province chief had his own military. Anyway, they picked us up and got us out of occupied territory to a place where the AVG, or the Flying Tigers, had a couple of airplanes. And, we waited there a few days, and an airplane came up and took us to Chongqing, which was the capital at that time.
And not many people saw Chongqing during the war. That must have been 19th century. Chongqing, when you got off the airfield, was an ancient city. And pretty backward, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, everything was very neat and so forth, but it was like going back a step at a time.
Yes, yes. So now, a number of the Doolittle's raiders were captured. And for those of you who haven't seen it, you can look up, for example, Jacob DeShazer, who's now deceased. There's a lot on the internet about Jacob DeShazer. When did you first find out? I guess it was maybe sometime later you found out some of your men didn't make it back, right?
There were two crews that were captured. The Chinese took us to a place where there was a telephone. And Colonel Doolittle was very concerned about finding out where everybody was and what kind of condition they were in. The Chinese located our airplane. They took Paul Leonard, the flight engineer, gunner, and Colonel Doolittle up to the scene of the wreck, which is up higher up on the mountain. And at that time, Colonel Doolittle was very dejected because he thought the mission had been a failure, and that he might end up in Fort Leavenworth. The crew chief, he confided in the crew chief about that, and the crew chief told him, no, he said, they're going to promote you to a general, and you're going to be awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor.
That's great.
That's what happened.
That's great. That's a great story there. So, Tell us a little bit about the reunions. Do we have a little more time? Tell us a little bit about the reunions, because you just had one in April, and the goblets, and a little bit about the tradition, because you're winding down to there are only 4 of you left. How many people made the reunion in April?
Well, at the outset, Colonel Doolittle told us that if we get back from the mission, I'm going to give you guys the biggest party you have ever had. And after all it was all over and the dust was settled, why, he did that. We had a reunion in Florida, and during the reunion somebody got the idea and said, hey, this is a lot of fun. Let's do it every year. And Doolittle said, now wait a minute, fellas. I'm paying for this. I can't afford this. So, but it happened that the next year we got an invitation from an air base, and I don't remember which one it was, but we had a reunion there. And there are a couple of reasons we decided to do it was that we kept getting these invitations, and we had to figure out what to do to give back to the city or the air base for having a reunion. And we decided on a traffic safety award, which we gave out for several years. And that kind of dried up. We came up with the idea of a scholarship. So we worked it out so to support the scholarship that we set $5,000, but we awarded to the city, who picked out people to receive the scholarship award, which was whoever the applicant was had to be between his sophomore and junior year in a college, and he had to be working toward a degree in aviation or space, and he had to have a 3-point grade point average. And the way that was done is the city picked out or gave it to their educational people, and they picked out the people, and we give them the scholarship.
I can't imagine a greater thrill than having a scholarship from Doolittle's Raiders.
Yeah.
So tell us about the goblets.
I wasn't present at the reunion that was held in New Mexico, but the city of
That's okay.
Tucson,
Okay.
city of Tucson, invited the group there, and they had 60 goblets made.
Silver, if I recall, right?
Silver
goblets.
And on one side would be the name right side up, and on the back side was the name upside down. So when everybody passed away, they set the thing upside down where you could read what it was. And those goblets are at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base Museum now.
And how many men were at the reunion this April? Were there 2 of you? Did all 4 of you make it to the reunion this April?
This year?
Yes, sir.
No, there were only 3 of us.
3, okay. And so when there are 2 of you left, you open a bottle?
That's supposed to be the it's supposed to work. But the way things change, I don't know.
I understand. Well, I'm sure somebody would, I'll be glad to help you get a bottle if you can't find one. You know, for just a few minutes, maybe we'll put a couple questions out. Do we have time? Okay. Do we have any questions out here? We could stay here all day, and I've talked to Dick over the years. He's got a booth. You have a table in the tent, don't you, Dick? Do you have a table? You have a table in the tent?
Yeah.
Yes. So you can always go by and see Dick. Does anybody have a question? Interesting question? Insightful question? Yes, sir.
How difficult was the takeoff?
How difficult was the takeoff of the modified B-25 off the deck of the Hornet carrier? Early on, everybody thought that was going to be the most challenging time, but it turned out to be the easiest time. We had a good ship wind and a good headwind, and we were able to get off a good distance ahead of the edge of the boat.
But your heart must have been pounding as you took off. You were the first. You took off first.
Yeah.
So if it wasn't going to work, you were the test case, right?
Well, I guess the rest of the guys were waiting for us to go in and drink. But,
Well, I'm guessing they were watching you very carefully.
and incidentally, plane number 3, the individual that wrote 30 Seconds Over Tokyo took off without flaps. So, he didn't have a problem. So,
Right.
and Colonel Doolittle wrote in his final report that a night takeoff could have been possible.
Right. You're not on here.
Just want to invite you. We're going to break with Dick at this point. He's going to go back over to his booth, but do stop by. And the items they're selling in his booth is to fund the scholarship that he mentioned. So Dick's going to run over. Dick, thank you for being a part of our program. And Wayne Johnson, thank you.
More to come. I can't tell you what an honor it is to talk with these two guys. I see them year after year, but it's still a thrill. I'm old enough that I read all these books. God is my co-pilot, 30 Seconds Over Tokyo. I saw the old Spencer Tracy movie, 30 Seconds Over Tokyo. When I was growing up, these guys were still young veterans, but you know, I would have dreamed when I was a kid reading these books and watching these movies that I would someday meet one of these gentlemen. So it's pretty exciting, and I'm sure you must feel the same. So this is Wayne Johnson of the Flying Tigers, and I always like seeing these guys with these hats because if you ever talk to veterans, a lot of them don't know where their hats are. Even the Vietnam guys don't know where their hats are sometimes. But Wayne managed to keep his hat. So, Wayne, I'm going to let you just really briefly, I just want you to start out again. I want you to tell us about the Flying Tigers, just briefly, and when you got into the theater in China, but who the Flying Tigers were, particularly the group you were in.
The name Flying Tigers was really dreamed up by a Chinese newspaperman. When he saw the first Americans come over, Japan had been bombing Chinese cities at will because they destroyed the Chinese Air Force. And when the first group of Americans came over, they, I believe there were 10 or 12 bombers came from Hanoi to bomb Chongqing, which was the headquarters of the Flying Tigers. And General Chenault, the commander of the Flying Tigers, sent up 2 flights of P-40s. That was 8 airplanes. And they met the Japanese bombers before they got to Kunming and shot down 11 out of the 12 bombers without any damage to any of the P-40s. A newspaperman said they were like Fei Hu, like flying tigers, because the tiger in Chinese lore is a very courageous animal. So that's how we got the name Flying Tigers.
I wore my shirt for Wayne. I try to wear it every year when I see him. And so, just to be clear, the original Flying Tigers were AVG, the American Volunteer Group. And these were Americans that were deciding they weren't going to wait for the war to start. So this is pre-Pearl Harbor, when Claire Chenault brought the American Volunteer Group over.
Yeah, the first mission they flew was actually December 23rd, 1941. And up till that time, they'd been training in India. And so their first mission, and a very successful one, was on December 23rd, 1941.
Wayne, when did you arrive in Chongqing?
I didn't get over to China. I was trained as an Army pilot. I was trained basically in low-level tactics. It was something new that the Air Corps had dreamed up. And they had a field that really in Mississippi that trained pilots only in low-level tactics. And so I went through quite a long training period. And I got to China in 1944. And I stayed in China till the end of the war in 1945. And I flew the P-40 first, and then the P-51 Mustang.
When did you start flying the P-51?
I believe it was sometime in mid-44 when we got the first P-51s.
So you flew for a fair amount of time with the P-51.
Yes, I think all told, I probably have about 450 hours in the P-51.
So you saw combat against Japanese Zeros in a P-40 and in a P-51?
Yes.
So one of the things I'd be interested in hearing about firsthand is, tell me about the differences that you felt performance-wise, tactically, going up against a Zero with a P-40 and with a P-51.
The Zero was more maneuverable than the P-40. It could outturn a P-40, and so Chenault taught his pilots just to try to get above them, take a pass, and keep going, and then climb back to altitude, and never try to get into a rat race with them, because of their maneuverability. They could shoot us down. We knew that the Zero was quite vulnerable. The early ones, they had no armor plating for the pilot, and their fuel tanks were not rubberized, so if you hit it on the fuel tank, it'll blow up immediately. But if we got a Zero on our tail, we usually just flip over and dive, because they couldn't catch a P-40 in a dive.
Right, the diving, whether attacking them or getting away from them, in either case, diving. The diving was a tactic, whether attacking a zero from above or escaping it going below.
For both, if you're coming above them or to escape.
So now for fun, I know the P-51, I don't know firsthand, but I know the P-51 was a dream to fly. Tell us about the P-51.
Well, the P-51 was, I think, probably more maneuverable than the Zero. We actually called any of the jet fighters Zeros, but they had a number of different types of planes. But they could not catch a P-40 in a dive, and neither could they catch a P-51 in a dive.
And so, but with the P-51, you did not have to attack Japanese fighters from above by diving. You could get in a dogfight.
No, there you could get in a dogfight with them.
And was dogfight the word you used when you were flying? Was dogfight the phrase you used?
That's what we call them, yeah.
Right. So tell us about one of the fights that you remember.
Well,
one of the more memorable ones.
I guess the one I can remember the best, and one I'd rather forget, was we were strafing Canton, and we were told only take the one pass and keep going. Well, we set so many planes on fire on the ground that we thought that was a hell of a good idea, and so we decided to come around one more time. And by then, of course, the Japanese ground crews had sighted us in pretty well, and I got hit in the coolant. And the P-51 with all of the coolant lines in the belly was very vulnerable. And I was going about 450 because I just came out of the dive. And so I had plenty of speed to get to altitude and bail out. The plane started smoking, but the Japanese had a kind of a bad habit of shooting at guys in parachutes. So I didn't think it was a good idea to bail out. And I got probably 25, 30 miles or more from Canton when, of course, the engine stopped. And I saw a nice straight road, so I decided rather than take the risk of bailing out, I would try to belly it in on this gravel road. What I couldn't see from the air that I saw when I got just leveled off was there were huge boulders on each side of the road. They just looked like black grass to me until I was probably 100 feet in the air. I'd already committed. There wasn't anything else I could do than to belly it in. The problem was that the road was so narrow and these boulders were a lot bigger than I thought. And so just about the time I started to touch down, both wings hit the boulders, and it ripped off both wings. And then it slid along on the belly a bit, and then it skidded sideways, and the tail hit the boulders, and the tail came off. And then it spun in the other way, and the engine hit, and that came off. So all I was sliding in was the cockpit, or what was left of it. I wasn't hurt, except both my thumbs were laying back on the wrist. I knew they weren't supposed to be there. So I grabbed the hole and jerked them into the sockets, and that really smarted a bit. And there were two Chinese fellows was working in a rice paddy right close by and saw me going in. And they came running and pulled me out of the wreckage. And this one fellow was probably 120 pounds at most, and probably 5'5", little guy. He put me on his back in a kind of a fireman's carry and ran for miles with me bouncing on his back. They hid me out in a swamp till dark, and then we traveled in the dark from then on. I was gone about 10 days before we got back to our airfield. So that was kind of an exciting experience.
What do we think? I think that's a pretty good story.
Many times people ask me about my borrowing a Jeep, and when I was on the way to China, my orders provided that I stop at an air base near Karachi, India. Now, Pakistan was probably 25 miles out in the desert, and I and 3 others had won a aerobatic competition, and so we were invited to the general's house in Karachi, and that was a real mansion on top of a hill, and there were about 30 or 40 of the most beautiful women I've ever seen. I don't know where they rounded them all up. They weren't for us. But the general was drinking scotch. So of course that meant everybody had to drink scotch. And I had never tasted scotch before. And so it didn't take very long before we were getting rather frivolous and too friendly with the girls. So we were escorted out and told to wait for the truck to take us back to the camp. And there was a nice P-40 or Jeep sitting right on top of the hill, and nobody was using it. So I got the bright idea that why not just borrow the Jeep for a little while instead of riding in a dusty truck. And so I jumped in the driver's seat, and the other guys pushed just a little bit to get it rolling, and jumped in. And we went down the hill, and there was a Sikh guards at the gate. And as soon as we got into the light of the gate, we saw the American flag on one fender sticking straight out, and on the other fender was a general's flag. Then we realized that we were in a tad of trouble, and but we didn't dare stop. So we raced back to our camp, and we didn't stop at that gate either, which wasn't a very good idea. But the other 3 guys had picked up some turbans, and the guards later reported there was a crazy white-headed guy driving, and 3 natives. Well, it wasn't long. I was the only white-headed guy on the base. My hair was always white. And it didn't take long for them to figure out who the guy was. And so I was hauled before the major who was commander of the camp. Fortunately for me, I had met him when we were in training in Sarasota, and he had gotten drunk one night, and when he signed in, he splattered ink all over the sign-in page. which would have caused them a little problem when they found out. So I was the officer of the guard that night, and so I covered up for him by carefully removing that page. And so when I was brought before him, he said, "Whitey, you are the luckiest SOB in here." He said, "I owe you a favor, and I'm gonna put you on the," he told the sergeant, "you take him out to the first plane that's taking off from this field. I don't give a damn where it's going. Just put him on the plane, and don't even let him stop to take a leak." So I got, and my orders, of course, had provided that I was going to be there for a month training with combat experienced pilots. So I ended up in Kunming, the headquarters of the Flying Tigers, with no orders. And the next morning, they brought all of the guys out that had just arrived at the post. And General Chenault came down the line. There were about 20 of us. And he'd stop and talk just a little bit to each guy. And I was really, he stood before me, and he had very black, piercing eyes. And he was looking at me, and I thought, oh, Jesus, he's found out about the Jeep. And he'll have me shot for sure. And he kept looking at me, and he finally said, "How old are you, son?" I managed to say, "I'm 20. He said, "What'd you do before you got in the Air Corps?" I said, "I was a farm boy." And he said, "Good. Farm boys make good pilots. They know what the engine sounds like." And then he said, "Where are your orders assigning you to?" And I was shivering so bad. Finally, I was able to stammer, my orders haven't caught up with me yet. It didn't seem to faze him. He just turned to his aide and he said, "Send him out to McComas." McComas was the commander of a squadron out in far eastern China. It was a small base, and it was surrounded by Japanese troops within about 50 miles. And he said, "They need pilots out there." So it wasn't long before I was out at this fighter base, where normally I would not have been there for a month.
So you were trained firsthand, baptism by fire. You got your combat training in combat.
Yes.
Great story.
Some years later, a couple of years I guess, General Chenault was being sent home just before the end of the war. And so he came around to all the bases to say goodbye to his pilots and crews. And he came up to me, and I happened to be the officer of the day, so it was my job to meet him at his plane and pick him up with the Jeep. And when he got out of his plane, he looked at me for a long time. And finally he said, "Son, I'd like to drive the Jeep. Is that okay?" And of course I allowed it. It was. And then we drove around the base and the camp for a while and meeting guys. And when he was ready to leave, he looked at me with a kind of a grin and said, "I really should have let you drive, because I understand you're very good at driving Jeeps."
So I just want you to know, I mean, I've interviewed a lot of guys like this, and so when I was talking to Wayne yesterday, just kind of prepping, I said, Wayne, we don't want to keep this just a plain vanilla. I said, you got to have a good story. Everybody I know has a really good story. And it took him about 10 seconds to say, you want to hear about liberating the general's Jeep? And I said, yeah. But I said, don't tell me the story. I want to hear it with everybody else. Great story. I don't know if that one can be topped. So tell me about the general. A little more about him, what he was like. Because I'll just say, again, when I was growing up, he was like a god to me. I read everything I could about him. And I want you to tell me firsthand what he was like.
He looked like a real tough guy. Very stern looking. But we found that he was a very sensitive fellow. Some of his staff told us that when he lost a pilot or lost an air crew, he would sit and cry. Said the tears would just roll down his cheeks. So we knew he really was a caring commander. Everybody respected him. Everybody loved him. And when he was sent home, there was a lot of bitter people that they should send him home and not be involved in the victory against Japan. And he was the only commander that was not on the Missouri during the surrender ceremonies. And it was said that MacArthur turned to one of his aides and said, "Where's Chenault? Why isn't he here?" Well, Arnold and Marshall disliked Chenault because he didn't go with spit and polish. He wanted to win a war. And so they managed to get him home before the surrender, so he missed that. And he was quite bitter about that for quite a few years. And 2 days before his death, Congress promoted him to Lieutenant General. But when he heard about that, he said, "I guess it's a little bit late."
Okay. So did you see him after the war? Did you ever have reunions?
Yes. We had a Flying Tigers reunion every year from 1946 until 2007. General Chenault died in 1958, but he attended every one of our reunions up until the time of his death. And his widow always attended all of our reunions, and she's still alive and still active.
Do you have any questions out here?
We must have done a pretty good job. There are no questions.
I've got 1,000 questions.
How many Flying Tiger pilots are left?
How many are there left? To my knowledge, there are only 2 others besides me. See, everybody's over 90, except me. I'm 39.
Good answer. Anybody else a question? Sir.
So, you grew up in a farm in Minnesota, you end up in China, you come back to Minnesota. Could you talk a little bit about what re-entry was like when you got back?
What was the last part?
Re-entry. Re-entry back to Minnesota.
Right, the question was what it was like to come back to Minnesota after being in China.
Yeah.
I got home in November of 1946, and I started college at the North Dakota State College on January 1947. So as soon as I got home, went to college, and I also signed up for the North Dakota Air Guard. They had just organized and had P-51s, and when they heard about the experience that I'd had flying a 51, they asked me to join the Air Guard. So I flew with the North Dakota Air Guard for the 2 years that I was in college in Fargo. And then I, left North Dakota State and went to the University of Minnesota and the University of Law School.
They didn't ask you to pay back for that P-51 you lost? Not yet?
I think I nosed one up, and they wanted me to pay for the prop. That's a kind of an interesting story if you want to hear it short.
We have 2 minutes, Don? Do you hear
This,
this story? Yeah, let's do it. Good.
another fellow and I, when we were in the Air Guard, we were allowed to take the 51s and fly wherever we wanted, weekends. And this other fellow and I had flown to Boston because he knew a couple of young ladies there that he thought were interesting. So we flew to Boston, and then on the way back, we ran into some pretty bad weather, and we had to climb up through the clouds, and got up to about 35,000 before we broke out. And so, of course, we'd used a lot of gas in the climb, and we headed for Fargo, and about over Detroit Lakes, 40 or 50 miles from Fargo, we ran out of gas. I ran out of gas. The other fellow had landed a little bit earlier at another field. And so from around 35,000, I knew I could glide to Fargo. This was about midnight, and because I didn't have the engine running, I didn't have any lights, and I managed to see the Fargo airport, which was lit up nicely, and I glided in, made a couple of circles, and glided in and landed, and rolled up in front of the tower. And I got out and called the guy in the tower if he could get me some transportation to town. And he comes down and sees the P-51 sitting there. He said, "How the hell did that plane get here?" And I explained to him that I had landed. And he said, "That's a dumb thing to do, to dead stick a P-51 in at night." And I said, "Well, I only had one other choice, and I didn't think that was a very good one." Have time for one little more story?
Probably not, but I'm going to listen to it later if anybody else wants to hear it.
Are we on? Yeah. Wayne's going to be on our World War II Roundtable program. If you pick the schedule at our booth over in the far aisle. But we've got him invited to 2 programs next spring, so pick up a program. Thank you so much, Wayne. Appreciate you.
Does he do a good job speaking?